what we're looking at right now is what's called the messenger server. The messenger server sits on a workstation or a server box. It could be in a virtual environment, but most of what I'm going to be showing you here is in the server, and just the administrator would have access to the messenger server. That's really where I could show you the features of the product. Before I do that, I like to focus on Messenger from an end user standpoint. There's two functions that we give an end user. And when we're talking about an end user, we mean the person that creates invoices, orders, purchase orders, statements, all business form processing. The two functions that they have is the ability to print with Liaison's print driver through your normal print routine in GP. Also, you'd have the ability to edit recipient preferences, either from within GP or from within our recipient list window, which I'll show you. Those are the two functions that an end user has. So the focus on the print driver, whatever your current print procedure is to generate a single invoice or a batch of invoices, you would go through the normal print procedure in GP to accomplish that. Our print driver would be set as the default print driver for that process. So nothing really changes for the end user. They just print like they always do. And Messenger would then distribute documents based on the rules at the server. The other function that the end user might have, and I'm clicking on the recipient list now, is access to this window. So here we have a recipient list. Now this could be maintained either in our window here or in GP in the customer record. Okay. What you have here, if you pull up a customer, we can then edit how that customer receives documents. So once these rules are set up, you only go back into this to update, say, a fax number or an email address or a preference. So we're pulling the fax number and email address on this default line right from the customer record in GP. We also store by document, as you see down below. We have invoices, orders, statements, and maybe even a marketing document that we could be distributing to this recipient list. Each of those has its own preference. A preference is typically print, fax, or email, with combinations of that down at the bottom. And then we have override fax number and override email addresses by document. And that's really what makes this unique, is because we're storing this information by document. If you have the fields available in GP to maintain this information, we could pull all of this information right from GP through our field linkage tab. And this is all done through an ODBC connection. We could also maintain, also auto-add new recipients. So when you process an invoice for a new customer, we'll create that customer preference window automatically. And then based on the hierarchy that you choose here is how we would send out to that customer. So if you chose a hierarchy of email, fax, print, we would first look for an email address. If there was no email address available, we would fax the document. And if no fax number, then we'd print it. So from an end user perspective, if we were training someone on how to use Messenger on a day-to-day basis, we're done. That's all they'd have access to, is printing with our print driver and editing recipient preferences either from our recipient list screen or directly from GP, from the customer record. Everything else we're going to be showing you here is just initial setup now, and this is all maintained at the Messenger server. What you have here is different emailing options. We have just over 1,000 clients that have used Messenger over the years. Almost all of them are using the one Outlook email client on the Messenger server machine. That's where the emails would go out from. It does support MAPI, and it supports SMTP and Gmail also if you decide to use those methods. On the faxing side, we have about 9 different faxing solutions that we work with. They all integrate through Outlook. Now, here on the Messenger server, again, under Rules and Resources, we have scripts that we could set up. A script is a set of rules or actions built around the report that is run through Messenger. So here's my script for invoices. I'll focus on 2 scripts here, invoice script and the statement script. Okay? So these, when someone prints a batch of invoices in GP with our print driver, Messenger creates a PDF, sends the PDF of all of those invoices to the Messenger server, where we burst the PDF into individual PDFs, reorganize it, and then distribute based on these rules that you see. I'll focus on the first 5 rules here. These are pretty typical. The first rule is saying route each invoice to the customer's preference, which we covered already. If the preference is print, it's going to go to the printer chosen here. Now simultaneously, we're archiving a copy as an example. We're archiving each invoice as its own PDF into a folder that's assigned here. We could be printing a hard copy if you need a hard copy printed in-house. This is called a file copy, which we could maintain the marginal word, the description of what it's used for here. And that's routed to, say, an accounting printer or maybe a warehouse printer if you choose. Maybe route copies to salespeople. So this line here is looking at each salesperson, the salesperson on each invoice, going back, what's happening in the background, it's going back to the recipient list for salespeople and then distributing to that proper salesperson and based on their method. Back to the script. Another example is routing to an individual under certain situations. So line number 5 is a controller copy. We're emailing that individual, but only based on the filtered criteria here. So any data that we're capturing off of the report, we could use to filter off of. Here we're saying route this line number 5 if the total amount of the invoice is greater than $10,000. Those are 5 typical examples of how people set up Messenger. Okay, back to the recipient list for a second. We did touch upon that we focused on the customer list. We could be talking about routing copies of documents to vendors, like EFT remittances or purchase orders to vendors. As I mentioned, to salespeople, we could be routing to warehouses, territories, maybe sending direct deposit statements to employees. So these would be all of your GP employees, and every employee we could even password protect the PDF that's sent out by storing a passphrase here, or back through the field linkage that I showed you earlier, we could map to a field in GP to pull the password down here. Okay, so back to the script, those are the 5 typical lines that are set up for an invoice script. The next thing to talk about here is the report that we're processing. So Messenger uses your existing report. Okay, so it could be using the GP Report Writer reports, SQL reporting services, could be Crystal. I'm actually going to process an Excel spreadsheet shortly to Ali. It could also use the Word templates that you have in the newer versions of GP. But really what we're doing with any of those reports, I'm pulling up a Crystal report now. I could be looking at the GP Report Writer report. Doesn't really matter. It's the same type of setup. If you look in the top left corner of this report, we have some hidden fields. These are called data identifier tokens. And they're really just calculated or formula fields that are hidden in the report. There's typically 3 to 8 of these hidden fields. But they allow us to look at the key data in that report that we need to look at. And that's all based on the script that's set up. So we would always have to be looking at the invoice number field if we're archiving, because we're going to use that data from that field as part of the naming convention of the archived copy. We also need to always look at the customer ID number, because we're going to route back to the customer preference. So if you look on the right-hand side, we have some examples of a token right over here. And in the middle, we have our actual field name that we're accessing from the report. The next step here is to actually run a report through Messenger. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to process a script. I have a simple example here using an Excel spreadsheet. Okay, this script here is saying to print a copy to the printer at my desk. It's going to then assemble what's called a supporting document. This is what's called a static attachment. It's taking this PDF here, and it's going to merge it with the PDF that we create from the Excel spreadsheet, and it's going to append it afterwards. So this is handy on purchase orders where we attach terms and conditions to a purchase order. What's going to happen in line number 3 is we're going to send this to the accounting department, which I'm going to include Ali in when I process this, and then we're going to archive a copy to a folder in line number 4. Now for line number 3, I'm going to jump back up to my recipient list here and go down to accounting department list, and I'm going to add Ali in here. preference as email. And inserted the email address. So here we're going to save that. So she's in the list now. Now back to the script and hit edit. If you look in the top left corner of this script editor screen, you'll see a script ID number of 53. That will be the one token that I have in the report that I process here. So right now I'm going to turn the server on. Messenger server is running. When you see that green light, it's looking for PDFs to process right now. I'm going to open up some windows so when we run Messenger, you'll see all these folders get populated. Here's my archive folder. That's one of the processes we'll have here is to archive to a folder. We're also going to distribute the 2 emails that were sent through the accounting department when they're going to go from my outbox to my sent box. And I'm also going to pull up the Excel spreadsheet. And just do a preview here, because it doesn't really matter what the report is. And keep in mind, even though we're focusing on GP, this could be run with other third-party products. It could be used with custom invoicing systems that are outside of GP, possibly, just by adding the tokens in the report and printing with our print driver. As you see here, we have our token in the top left corner of this preview. You see the script ID number 53. That's normally hidden. At this stage is where you would be in GP printing through that normal print routine and printing with our print driver. So that's what I'm going to do in a second is I'm going to hit print and I'll minimize the expense report. So what you'll do in the background in the next 1 to 6 seconds, once I hit print, you'll see that green light flash to yellow for a split second. And then it's going to go back to green when it's done and you'll see the folders get populated. Here we go. I'm minimizing the report. We're watching the green light now. Processing, it's yellow and back to green. Messenger is done. It's you can see it's been archived to the archive folder. It's printing to the printer in the bottom right corner. And then you see I have the 2 emails in the background have been sent. So Allie's email and my email have been sent. We were the 2 in the accounting department. I'll pull up the email that was sent to Allie. So here is our standard email text that we included. And there's the PDF that we created out of that Excel spreadsheet. And if you remember, we had a static attachment we included here. Page 2 and page 3 is the Messenger EDD brochure that was appended to this process. It's always including that PDF. That's a static attachment. One other feature we're going to show you here is what's called a variable attachment. Okay, so if I jump back up to the script for invoices, if you remember, line number 2 in this script is archiving a copy of each invoice that's run through. So if I jump over to the statement script, when someone goes and prints their statements for all their customers, what's happening here in line number 3 is what's called a variable attachment. So what we're doing is we're looking at all of the data, all of the invoice numbers listed on the statement, grabbing that data, going into the archive folder of invoices and retrieving all the applicable invoices, and then merging them together with the statement. So the end result is the customer receiving 1 email with 1 attachment. Page 1 is the statement. Page 2 through 10 would then be the supporting documentation. And again, that's the most common example of a variable attachment. We have other customers that attach, say, to an invoice, they attach instructions to an invoice. So they would create a whole library of instructions by item number. They would save each PDF by item number. And then when the invoice is created, we review all the item numbers on the invoice and go back and retrieve the proper instructions and send those, not only sending them out to the customer, but also archiving them in-house so you have a record of all the instructions for that job. This could be related to MSDS's, Certificate of Compliance, Certificate of Analysis, Bill of Ladings can be attached. These are some of the more common documents that we handle under variable attachments.